is the first in a series of videos I'm going to do about some of the science fiction novels that have inspired me throughout the years. Today I'll be starting with Robert Anson Heinlein's Starship Troopers. Starship Troopers was published in 1959, and I first read it in the early 1970s. And although at that point in time I had read many science fiction books before, this is one of the earliest that I can really recall making a serious impact on me. So much so I can remember reading it, and it was like a jolt of electricity. It triggered a lifelong love of hard and military science fiction in me. I should point out that later in this video there will be spoilers, so be aware of that. And I'm specifically going to be focusing on the novel, not the 1997 Paul Verhoeven movie, which I absolutely adore. I really love that movie. It does take a very different, over the top, satirical view of the original source material, but it is still a fabulous film. But I'll be focusing very much on the novel. And I'll also be focusing on a future video on what I see as the counterpart to Starship Troopers, which is Joe Haldeman's The Forever War, which is a book I read not particularly long after Starship Troopers. It takes a very similar style, but turns it into something very different and almost a counterpoint to Starship Troopers. I love both equally, but for now, today, I'm going to be talking specifically about Robert Heinlein's Starship Troopers. Now, the book itself has been equally celebrated and reviled over the years, with a lot of political discussion around it. I don't particularly intend to get into that deeply, but I do have a few observations. One is that in science fiction, I believe that all future possible worlds are valid, and discussion of those and writing about those is a perfectly valid point of view. You don't have to like the idea to appreciate the art. Secondly, I think that in 1959, certainly science fiction was still very much seen as a youth or a niche following, not necessarily something looked upon critically, intellectually, as worthy of intellectual discussion. And this novel certainly changed that, amongst other novels, of course, but this one particularly caused discussion outside of the normal science fiction fandom because of the subject matter and the world that it was presented and people's views on what Heinlein's politics might have been. So that, in a sense, is a good thing, I think, in that it certainly took science fiction out of the Buck Rogers world, as it were, and caused a lot of serious discussion around it. So I certainly won't be delving into the politics too much. I just really want to focus on what is it I like about this novel, why does it inspire me, and kind of impression that has it left on me, and why. Heinlein's own military service and his engineering work informed much of the narrative, and some of the key themes that he explored in the book are coming of age, differing government and political systems, the virtues of self-sacrifice and service, and the nature of war against those seen as the other. But this was all wrapped up in a compelling tale of a band of brothers and sisters fighting to survive in a brutal war. And although never specifically dated, the story is set on Earth approximately in the world of 2600 AD, roughly 700 years forward from the time of writing in 1959. There is a global government of the Terran Federation, and critically, although this world seems relatively free and prosperous, there are limits on suffrage and power. Specifically, only retired military veterans can vote and hold political office. Now, the story is lived and narrated through the eyes of Juan Johnny Rico, a grunt in the mobile infantry, the titular Starship Troopers. And the action starts with a bang as Rico and his fellow mobile infantry drop onto a planet, literally drop from space, to fight a deadly battle. The enemies in this war are the combined forces of the mysterious Bugs and the Skinnies, and known as the Bug War. This is the latest in a series of space conflicts, but the first to be truly interstellar. And the planet they drop onto is the home world of the Bugs, and it does not go well. The narrative then migrates between following Rico's progress in the military and the progress of the war, interspersed with scenes of Rico's high school years, in particular his history and moral philosophy classes, and the events leading up to his volunteering for the military. Competing influences of Johnny's history and moral philosophy teacher, Mr. Dubois, and Johnny's father, and the differing world views between those two men are important. And also fascinating to me is that Johnny's expectations of what his role and standing might be in the military when he volunteers against the brutal reality of his real abilities and the actual assignment he receives is quite an eye opener to him, and it makes for very interesting reading. And Johnny's no Buck Rogers, and he ends up in the mobile infantry, and it's a bit of a shock to his ego and ambitions. Another one of my favourite parts of the story is Johnny's father's dim view of Johnny signing up, but their eventual emotional reconciliation later in the war is a great scene for me in particular. So also, Mr. Dubois' history and moral philosophy classes are a fascinating exposition of the political and military systems of the world created in the novel. And throughout the story, there is various civil and political systems discussed by characters, and this discussion of ideas is given equal weight in the novel to the military combat depictions. Despite the controversy over the depiction of the civil society and military influence over it, Heinlein's vision of this future is that gender, sexuality, and race are of no real consequence, and it appears to be a very equal society. Women, in fact, are accepted as being superior in many fields, in particular, critically, spaceship pilots, who are exclusively female because of their far superior qualities. Uh, but for me, it was the detailed descriptions of the military training, the battle tactics, and the equipment and the battles themselves that really gripped me and still make for hugely enjoyable reading. The mobile infantry wear heavily armored powered flying suits. They're part spacesuit, part tank, part flying machines, and the descriptions of these and the drops from outer space onto planets into battle are breathtaking, and they basically inspire all military science fiction stories ever since. And the strong bonds formed by Johnny and his comrades in arms are also very compelling. Another key point in the story is that the availability of a faster than light space drive, and the fact that this basically allows the Heinlein to ignore relativistic time effects, unlike in the Joe Haldeman's Forever War, which very much took account of those. So I don't want to delve any further into how the war progresses, as this will lead into spoiler territory. Instead, I would highly recommend that anyone with an interest in getting into reading science fiction novels adds this to their must-read list. It's a seminal work, one of the best science fiction novels ever written, very influential and still relevant today. Anyway, that's my short summary of Robert Heinlein's Starship Troopers and what it meant to me and the key things that I enjoyed about it. So thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe, and my next in the series of book retrospectives will be another masterwork, Joe Haldeman's The Forever War. So thank you for listening.